What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Long Game Podcast hosted by Thomas Kopelman and Trayton DeVore. In each episode, you'll hear us break down financial topics that are relevant to the lives of millennials and other young professionals. Our goal is to help bring credible financial information to you in short, bite-sized episodes.
Thomas Kopelman and Trayton DeVore are the co-founders and financial planners at All Street Wealth. All opinions expressed by Thomas and Trayton are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of All Street Wealth. This podcast is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. It should not be considered advice. Please consult with your financial advisor, tax, legal, and any other advisors you have before making any decisions regarding your financial plan.
All right. What's up? And welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Long Game Podcast. Today, I am joined by one of my good friends, Cody Garrett. I don't know if you guys know Cody. I'd be kind of surprised if you didn't at this point, but he's just another top financial planner. He's all over social media, just like I am. But you've made a big pivot, I would say, over the last couple years. I think moving, you've always been a financial planner for DIYers, not somebody that's been managing investments, but seems like you've made a really big shift here to be focused on helping advisors a lot. And also, I think you have a course coming out next year, right? For DIYers too.
Yeah, that's right. So I had a big pivot I was actually a professional musician for 10 years. Then I became a financial planner as an employee. And it was funny. I didn't realize that as a musician, I was actually an entrepreneur, but as a musician, I was just doing tons of different gigs, all at different places. I didn't think of that as being a business owner, an entrepreneur. But once I became an employee at a firm, at a financial planning firm, investment management firm, I felt it. I was like, oh, wow, this is what it's like to be within the kind of the boundaries of being an employee, which isn't a bad thing, but it's just different, different for different people. So a few years into that, I got my CFP designation, certified financial planning professional designation. And then I really gained an interest to serve really the underserved community. Usually when you think of underserved, you think of people with not a lot of money, where in reality, the niche I serve is people who have money, but don't want their money managed by an advisor. So I serve DIY investors on the path to early retirement within 5 years. I launched that firm back in, I guess it was 2021. And now really pivoting into teaching other financial advisors and financial planners how I do that, because my comprehensive financial planning covers typically 25 to 30 topic areas. Whereas, a lot of the traditional advisors, quote unquote, they might look at just investments and insurance and that's it. They don't look at your tax returns. They don't look at your pay statements, your employee benefits, right? All the things that you look at, Thomas, we are in kind of the 1% of advisors who actually care to look at those things, because we don't let the product lead the plan. Planning, I always say, to give advice in somebody's best interest, you first have to understand their interest. So now that I do that in my firm, a lot of other financial advisors, at this point, about 1,400 other financial advisors are asking, hey, Cody, how do you do it? Can you tell me how you do it? And rather than just telling them, I show them. So I create a video course and an educational community for advisors. And now I'm pivoting to becoming even more passionate about the consumer again, is saying, how can I educate the DIY investor, right, who can't work with me one-on-one? How can I really empower them to even start their own financial planning journey without an advisor?
Yeah. The same reason that we did the course too, is I just view it as I would love to help everybody, but one-on-one financial planning is, in all reality, to get a good financial planner is a high cost thing, right? We can only work with so many people, and we're naturally, our time is valuable, that we're going to focus on the people with a lot of complex needs. But I'm with you. It's funny to think of a lot of the clients I serve might be making millions of dollars a year, but they're still underserved because most advisors can only sell products or manage their investments. And for a lot of them, a lot of it's in the business, or externally, they like to manage it themselves. They want the advice, but they don't necessarily want to pay through an asset under management fee. But I think maybe I'm a little different, where I have both models. If you want us to manage your investments, we will, but I would say over half our clients don't. And I could care less at the end of the day. We're paid fairly for our time. It is really an interesting job to do the investment location and allocations for these people, because it's actually a hard job. I don't pretend. I have people come in with millions of dollars in a taxable account. They have 401ks, Roth IRAs, et cetera. And to do the whole rebalancing sheets, that's been one of the main projects my new hire and I have been working on. And it takes hours for us to create that one page just to be accurate, right? Because even if you say like one of the funds is the S&P 500, well, that's some large cap, some mid cap, it spreads out where it's not as easy as like 20% here, 10% here, like funds, especially if you have any sector funds and like value, profitability, growth, et cetera, they sprinkle. So it just becomes like not the easiest
Core and explore.
job.
Yeah.
It just, and then all of a sudden in the next quarter, portfolio changes and it's a whole big project again.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I've done in my firm is rather than chasing. Again, we'll talk a lot today about like I love tax optimization. I feel like that is the most tangible value. One of the biggest like kind of tangible values you can see. Like you can actually see the dollars and cents that are saved, not just in the short term but in the long term by doing tax planning. With that said, when I'm a lot of optimization comes from those accounts and charitable giving with those accounts, like donor advised funds, giving appreciated securities, right? And at the same time, you want to do all this like tax optimization, but how can I make it super effective but also efficient? So I've really come down to like again, simplify the things out of your control, which means really like taking like creating really basic templates, translating that complex information into like a simplified narrative that both I can understand and the person I'm serving can understand. But then you can just make your own systems. Like I create my own rebalancing Excel calculators. Each client has their own rebalancing calculator where I can type in exactly how much they have in each fund, and it tells me exactly how much to buy and sell, including tax loss harvesting and avoiding the wash sale rule. So I think that if you focus on creating effective planning, you can always find a way to simplify the tool or template that you're using.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, well, let's hop into today's topic. I'm excited. So I've been getting some feedback from some people who are like, we're getting into really complex things. And I love getting into really complex things in my podcast just because part of it's I'm learning too from really great guests with me. But one thing that I think is on a lot of people's minds is the whole Roth versus traditional decision, right? And it's something that we haven't talked about on the podcast and that you talk about all the time. So I really want to dive into this whole conversation around, do you go Roth? Do you go traditional? And I'm very curious to hear, obviously, your viewpoints. And so maybe we just start with like the difference between the two, how they work, and we'll go through some of the pros and the cons. And then maybe it's beneficial to think through different groups of people.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like putting a real case study to the situation, like really clarifies whether or not it makes sense for, a certain individual. Because I actually have a trademark, keep finance personal, that at the end of the day, our advice is only as good as how well we understand somebody. So to start off, think about when people talk about traditional versus Roth, what they're really talking about is the tax characteristic of the contribution and the distribution. So the contribution is the money, you're putting money into this account. And to simplify today, I know there's different types of accounts that can be traditional Roth. There's 401ks, 403bs, right? 457s, IRAs, right? For simplification, we'll just talk 401ks, at least to start. We can always go a different direction, but traditional contributions, those are also called them pre-tax contributions. That's when you make a contribution to an account, and the amount of money that you put into that account is either excluded or deducted from taxable income. So a 401k example, you contribute through work, right? You typically as an employee, you contribute. Sometimes your employer contributes too, with an employer match or some type of non-elective contribution, right? Where they might even contribute even if you don't, right? So we can get into the weeds of those things too. But if you contribute traditional, that money actually comes out of your, that contribution comes out before that money's taxed. So an easy way to think about this is when you get your W-2 the next year to file your taxes, your box one of taxable earnings, taxable wages, does not include how much you contributed to that 401k. So it's actually been deducted, excluded from income before it even shows up on your tax form. So you don't double dip and try to take that deduction again. It already happened before you receive your W-2, right? The pro of traditional contributions really is that it reduces taxable income in the current year, right? And but every advantage has a disadvantage, right? You can't no free lunches here. So you get the advantage of reducing your taxable income this year on your contribution, but then the disadvantage is that when you take money out of that account, typically in retirement, depending on the account, pretty much every dollar that you take out of that account is going to be taxable as ordinary income, in that future year. So it's really save taxes this year, pay taxes later. On the flip side, I know there's about 5 advantages, disadvantages of each of these might get into. The Roth is the opposite, which means that you pay taxes today, you don't pay taxes later. When you contribute to a Roth 401k, for example, you're contributing with money that's already been taxed. One thing that's really important here to think about is, let's say that you contribute $20,000 to a traditional 401k, or you contribute $20,000 to a Roth 401k. It actually requires different amounts of money to contribute that amount. When you contribute $20,000 to a traditional 401k, you need $20,000 to do that. When you contribute $20,000 to a Roth 401k, you actually have to have the $20,000 to put into the account plus the taxes, right, that it required to, that you had to pay on that contribution amount. So keep in mind that even if you contribute the same amount, quote unquote, to Roth and traditional, it actually requires different levels of income in that year. So Roth is the opposite, whereas you make after-tax contributions, and hopefully, if you follow the rules in retirement, hopefully every dollar that comes out of that account will be received tax-free, effectively not being considered taxable income when you file your taxes.
Yeah, perfect. So just summary for everybody. So traditional side, let's say you make $100,000. That means you're at the 22% marginal tax bracket. You put $20,000 in your 401k. That reduces your income from 180. So really what ends up happening is you save, $20,000 times your marginal tax rate of 22%. So you save $4,400 on taxes, but that's not the end of the story. When you withdraw this money in retirement, you are going to pay tax on that. With your Roth 401k, if you make 100 and you put 20,000 into your Roth, you are still taxed on that $100,000. That money goes in, it gets invested for the future, and that never gets taxed again. And I feel like this is the part where people are like, oh, but of course you want to do Roth because you'd much rather pay taxes on the 4,400 than pay taxes in the future when it grows. But all things equal, if you're taxed at 22% at the front or 22% at the backside, you end up at the exact same dollar amount. And that's really hard for people to comprehend. It's because you're investing with less versus, tax later on it.
Yeah, one of the biggest misconceptions in the way it's sometimes sold, especially if you hear somebody really focusing on the power of Roth and tax-free, you got to be careful there, because they'll say things like, hey, would you rather pay taxes on the seeds that you plant, your contributions, or would you rather pay taxes on every apple you pull from the huge apple orchard in retirement? Effectively saying that the seeds are small and the apples are big, where in reality, you might actually, the taxes you pay on the seeds might actually be much lower than you pay on the apples, or vice versa. So I always talk to people about these marginal rates. You talked about a single filer in the 22% bracket making $100,000. So their taxable income is in 22% marginal tax bracket. So every dollar they contribute to traditional, they're saving 22% federal taxes on that. But here's the deal: they're saving taxes at their current highest marginal tax bracket, the 22% tax bracket. And a lot of people say, okay, well, if you distribute that money in the 22% tax bracket, like it's a wash, like it's the same, right? But in reality, think about now like the characteristic of somebody taking money out of a retirement account. I work with a lot of early retirees. And what I mean by that is, let's say somebody's retiring at age 50, right? Which income sources do they have at age 50? A lot of them don't have any yet. Like they effectively are just living off of their portfolio until pension, Social Security. Maybe they might have some rental income, right? But keep in mind that even if they're, when they take the distribution from their 401k, the distribution might actually cover multiple marginal tax rates. Yes, it could hit the 22, but it also might cover some of the 12, the 10, and what we don't really talk about, the 0% tax bracket of the standard deduction. So, and also keep in mind, this is a really good example too, that you talked about a single filer, right? Somebody making $100,000. What if they distribute this money when they're married, right? $100,000, $100,000 when you're married actually is in the 12% tax bracket, right? So you can see that, even your filing status can play a role in terms of like we call, tax rate arbitrage. So a really crazy example here. We can share all these notes on the sideline, and I've written lots of articles about this. Think about marginal tax rates when you contribute, but be careful about how you consider marginal when you distribute, because let's assume somebody takes money out of a 401k in retirement, but they have no other sources of retirement income. That means those distributions are taxed at 0%, 10%, 12%, 22%. And a crazy example here is that person who saved, a single filer who saved money at the 22% tax bracket when they contributed. So they hit the 22% tax bracket with an AGI of only adjusted gross income of only around $60,000. But if they were in retirement with no other income sources, they would not hit a 22% effective tax rate, which is like the average of all those tax rates on distribution, until they have income of, this is pretty crazy, $250,000.
Yeah. And
Right.
this is what I love. And this is what I think most advisors actually are getting wrong. And so I sit down with clients and I'm showing them, I'm like, you've been in Roth. There's nothing wrong with Roth, but a lot of the clients I'm working with are 35 and 37% tax bracket. And
Right.
I'm like, you plan to retire early. When we think about Roth versus traditional, we're just trying to optimize tax brackets. We're both trying to save for retirement. That's the bigger goal. But then picking between the two accounts is about optimizing tax brackets to pay a lower effective tax bill. And I show them, I say, hey, look, you're right now in the marginal, let's say 35% tax bracket. Your effective tax rate is 22%. You have like a 40% savings rate with kids at home, with private school, whatever. In retirement, you're not going to be living off of this amount of money. And your effective rate right now is, 10, 15% lower than what your marginal rate is. Okay. So in retirement, if you lived off of this amount of money, you would be withdrawing at an effective rate of 10 to 15% lower.
Right.
Just that
with the same lifestyle.
Yeah. So just that example is exactly why you'd want to do traditional. But then this is where people start to come in and say like, but tax rates are going to be higher in the future. And that might be fair, right? You might predict that tax rates are going to be higher in the future. Even if we look to 2026 with tax rates going higher, it still wouldn't put this situation I'm telling you about, it would not put them at a higher effective tax rate than what that marginal part would be. I think people, and again, advisors do this all the time. They say taxes are going to go up higher, but you're sitting here making $600,000 in your 40s. That does not mean you're going to have a higher tax rate in your 50s, 60s, 70s, et cetera, right? Tax rates can be up, but it can still be a lower marginal rate for you.
Here's the funny part. I mean, I think that we're some of the only two that talk about this in this way, and that, they get into really like kind of questioning like that traditional thought of like Roth versus traditional. And the single filer within the 35% tax bracket, right? The marginal tax bracket while working, their adjusted gross income is around $245,000 to get into that bracket. So let's say that let's say they even spend, $200,000 a year, right, on their lifestyle. But to get to a 35% effective tax rate in retirement with no other income sources outside of their portfolio, they have to withdraw $2.2 million from the account to actually hedge that bet. So it's like, so what I tell people when they say, well, tax rates might be higher, the issue is that we should not be focused on the tax rates. We should be focused on our sources of taxable income. But just like you said, even if the tax rates doubled, that person would still be better off making traditional contributions, not because of the tax rates, but because of their sources of taxable income in retirement. So I'm with you. I don't really base it off of, marginal rates today or tomorrow. Like there are people in the 12% marginal tax bracket who would actually be better off making traditional contributions. So it's definitely it depends. But with that said, I think that if you think of yourself as being in your highest earning years, and here's a really good kind of hint. The IRS does not let you make direct Roth IRA contributions, right? If your income exceeds certain thresholds. And I know we talk about the backdoor and the mega backdoor ways of getting around that, but if the IRS says you make too much money to contribute to a Roth IRA, that might also even though there's no income thresholds to contribute to a Roth 401k, the IRS is kind of giving you a hint. Like if you make too much to contribute to a Roth IRA directly, maybe you shouldn't be contributing to a Roth 401k directly. Maybe only contributing to a Roth 401k if you've already, maxed out the traditional and you're doing those mega backdoor contributions. So yeah, if you're what you consider your highest earning years, you're probably better off mathematically, tax-wise, and again, keeping more of what you earn and invest and save by making those traditional contributions, which is kind of the opposite of what most people are saying right now.
Totally. And it's always funny to me listening to a lot of the other advisors talk about this situation, because one of the excuses, or I guess not excuse, reasons is like, yeah, but tax rates today are known. It's like, So we're just going to pay tax today because we know for sure the rate today. Like, if you're choosing only about certainty and that's what you want to do, then why are you even investing, right? Wouldn't you just put everything in an annuity if all we cared about is certainty and how you can plan around certainty? And like, of course they wouldn't do that, right? That would not be part of the conversation that they have. I mean, to me, and I definitely apply this to everybody, but rule of thumb for me is really like 10 and 12, I typically do Roth. 22 and 24 are kind of like situational based on the person of like, how much, at what age are you in this bracket? Are you going to make significantly more down the line? Like if you're in the 24% tax bracket, early 20s, maybe it does, or mid 20s, whatever, maybe it does make sense to do Roth because you have a ton of pre-tax years coming up in the future. 32, 34, 37 is kind of like, yeah, let's do traditional here. And I have a lot of advisors argue with me about this too, is like nobody does Roth conversions or like nobody retires early. And again, I think that comes down to the clients that you work with. Like if you're used to working with like people who have to work a really long time just to have enough to be able to retire is very different than like a lot of the clients we're working with could retire in their 30s or 40s and maybe they choose not to. But we'll talk about RMDs and I'll let you go into that. But right now at 75 for most of my clients are not going to work to 75. That means that they retire at 60, which is still
not by choice.
Yeah. And if they retire at 60, because, and that's still not overly early, that's 15 years of Roth conversions, right? Some at 0, some at 10, some at 12, some at 22, some at 24. I mean, we could convert all of their pre-tax money over to Roth over 10 plus years with an effective rate of probably, 15 to 20% versus 37 plus California. Like, that is a huge difference. And so I think advisors that just say Roth everything because of where tax rates are going to go and because you want tax-free growth are missing out because they're going to have their clients potentially pay hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in extra taxes if you compound out that liability.
Yeah. And they kind of maybe unintentionally, said this, which is that, like if you contribute everything to traditional, but don't have an intentional plan of how you're going to distribute that tax in a tax optimized way by doing Roth conversions and, and also like manipulating that around maybe health insurance subsidies, right. And other, tax opportunities. Yeah. If you don't make a plan for what you're going to do in the future to unwind that in a tax efficient way, then maybe you just like, blindly just say, oh, well, if I can afford the taxes, I'll pay it. But that kind of the irony here is that if a financial advisor doesn't believe that clients are going to be intentional about those distribution strategies, then like you kind of ask them like, isn't that what you're supposed to be? Like, isn't that what you're there for, advisor? Like that's something that's another thing, right? It might make sense to hire an advisor when you're at that place of saying, hey, I contributed to Roth. I contributed to traditional pre-tax. I have like, 80% of my net worth now is in pre-tax retirement accounts. Like that, especially in early retirement, like that's the time to spend a few $1,000s here or there to hire a financial advisor to help you create a tax optimized plan. Because again, like I can't quantify the value of Roth conversions, but at least like, conceptually on paper, like I bet pretty much every client I've worked with in early retirement with Roth conversions, they're going to save over $1 million in taxes. Again, I can't quantify exactly how much, but just basic conceptualization, like that decision to contribute to traditional and then make an intentional Roth conversion plan, just that alone implemented correctly, like is probably one of the highest tangible reasons to either hire a financial advisor, a financial planner, or to learn how to do it yourself.
Definitely. I have a client that I'm working on now, and I'll just kind of smudge the numbers a bit and some stuff. So it's obviously not recognizable, but basically mid 40s, let's call it just under 10 million net worth. About half of that's in investments. They have a lot in cash that needs to be readjusted, and they're starting another business. And after this year, they have a high income year again this year. They're going to start this new business. It could be a C Corp. And so, for a while, it's just going to be building this business and they're going to be living off of cash. But almost it's like 80% is in pre-tax, right? So they have like, a few $1 million in pre-tax in their 40s, right? That's compounded out going to be at least 10 million plus, right? So that's going to be some large RMDs that you don't really want. And for them, they now have the ability to say, well, we build this business, probably going to be a few years before we pay it ourselves. We've been in the 37% bracket forever. Okay, great. So now they even have 3 years at a minimum where they could convert through 24%. Right. So you're actually looking at taking anywhere from 33 to 50% over those 3 years. optimizing at a lower bracket, significantly lower than what they were paying, and now going to be able to let that compound out. So now we're not going to have RMDs on a majority of it. We're not going to have this problem where we have too large of RMDs, because again, they're going to run this business. They've exited a couple other businesses before. So we're going to have another time to do RMDs, to do Roth conversions down the line. And this is where planning starts to become really, really impactful, right? Because you're talking about millions of dollars. Like, this will be millions of dollars. And the great thing for them is because they have so much cash on the sidelines, they can let the Roth happen and pay the tax out of cash. And so now they even have more that's going to be able to get invested and grow for the future.
There's two things that you said are really important there. One is, yes, if you're launching a business, I did this when I launched my business. I knew that, hey, like, it's always a slow start, right? And not just slow in terms of, like, not a lot of revenue, but there's a lot of expenses when you launch your business. Like, you might make good money, but most of your money goes toward, like, launching it and marketing and all those things. So same thing, like, it's funny, I contributed traditional at my last job. And I also, by the way, got the employer match. The employer portion was made traditional at that point. When I launched my business, I transferred my 401k over to an IRA and converted it all to Roth, right? So yeah, you don't have to wait to do Roth conversions when you're in your, like, 50s and 60s. You can do it in those years that you just dip real low for a few years as you're launching something new. So if you're a serial entrepreneur, like, you feel like you're just launching a new business like every few years, like, take advantage of those low income years, especially, by the way, if you're a C Corp, where you can actually control how much income you take on the personal side. And of course, you need a way, like, whether or not it makes sense to, focus on reducing cost of health insurance versus, if you have kids going through college, like, hey, do you kind of, like, pretend you don't have a lot of money for a few years so your kids get more, grants and scholarships? A lot of people say that manipulating, quote unquote, that system is immoral, but I very much have the take that you work smartly with the system that you're in. So
kind of like
I definitely take full advantage. Right. Yeah, exactly. So not going for forgiveness would actually be like an irrational thing, even if you believe politically or morally that it's wrong. The second part is I love that you mentioned this. This is so important. You said cash on the sideline. So not necessarily that it's about cash, but I think the best investment account that nobody talks about is just the normal taxable brokerage account. And the reason I say that too is that you talk about these years when I did Roth conversions. If you do a Roth conversion before age 59 and a half, you do not want to withhold the taxes from the conversion itself, because even though the conversion will not be subject to a 10% penalty, early withdrawal penalty, the taxes will if withheld from the conversion itself. So you need to make sure that not only that you have enough money set aside for your living expenses, but also have enough money set aside in your taxable brokerage savings to cover the tax liabilities on those intentional Roth conversions. So whether you're young or I work with people in their 50s, 60s, most people I work with, they want to have at least $1 million in taxable brokerage savings when they retire so that they can sustain their lifestyle, control taxable income, and do some of those Roth conversions, sometimes up to the, through the 24% tax, 24 marginal tax bracket. Again, like you said, that effective 10-15 rate. But if they didn't have that flexibility and liquidity in taxable brokerage account, it would be much, much harder to manipulate and control those conversions. So yes, spot on cash on the sidelines.
Well, and it's even something to think about, because for us as a part of this plan, we're like, okay, we should not be 50% cash. Like, that's just way too much. Right. And then they were just waiting. They didn't really know what to do. And it's like, but now when we're allocating that cash, we want to make sure that we leave enough on the sidelines to plan for the Roth conversion that's going to be coming throughout next year. But okay, cool. I think best way to kind of wrap up this topic is really think through pros and cons of both. I know that you've thought through these really well. So let's start with, traditional, and let's go through pros and cons.
So the advantages of traditional contributions, those pre-tax contributions, is that yes, it reduces taxable, ordinary income in the current year. We've talked a little bit about that. One possible advantage that, by the way, it's out of your control, right, is that future tax rates may be lower, right? Everybody says tax rates may be higher, like they may be lower. We don't know. So that's like an advantage that, like, again, that's out of our control. So kind of scratch it off the list, if you will. Advantages that we talked about, there's an advantage of traditional that in retirement or in lower income years, you can do those Roth conversion strategies, with a much lower effective tax rate than the marginal tax rate of contribution.
Gives you the flexibility for that, right? Roth, you have no option to think about anything different.
Yeah, you can't, you can't convert, part of that Roth to more Roth. It's all sitting there. And then another advantage of traditional is that if you contribute, if you lower your taxable income, you might be able to, might be able to gain access to more subsidies in the current year, such as the premium tax credit for health insurance, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you're like, if you contribute to traditional, you might be able to keep your income low to get some subsidies. Also, if you contribute to traditional, if you are working in if you're working in your 70s, for example, right? If you contribute to traditional, you might be able to reduce like the taxation of Social Security. But again, that's a very rare thing. Also, an advantage of having at least some in traditional is qualified charitable distributions. They're called QCDs, which means if you plan to give to charity in retirement, it's best to give it to charity directly from a traditional IRA. Starting at 70.5 is when you can do that. So I would say if you give to charity, you probably want at least some in tradition. Don't convert everything, right? Always have like some in traditional so you can give to charity tax efficiently. And lastly, let's say that you end up, you're going to change, you're going to move to a different state at some point. Let's say that you're working in California, right? And you plan to retire in Texas, right? Don't come here, we're full, right? But I would say that, a lot of people would love to avoid, not just federal, but state income taxes on their contribution so that they can retire in a tax-free or lower tax, state tax regime. So those are the advantage of it. So we talk about advantages of traditional. Now you can say every advantage has a disadvantage. So the disadvantages of traditional now are that the money you pull out, that you distribute in retirement will be included in taxable income. So it's up to you, right, to have intention over how much, what your tax rate is at that point. Future tax rates may be higher, right? We talked about again, right? They may be lower, maybe higher, out of our control. Another disadvantage is if your only source of income is from traditional IRAs, you don't have much control over taxable income. So you might lose out on those premium tax credits. You might pay the full, 85% of your Social Security may be, included in taxable income. And you might also pay those IRMA, those Medicare surcharges when you're 65 plus. RMDs, that's probably the biggest disadvantage of traditional. If you don't have an intentional distribution strategy, you get hit with these RMDs, and sometimes your taxable income is out of your control through the end of life. And lastly, disadvantage of traditional is that the inheritance is taxable to your heirs, right? So whether it's, again, if you don't, somebody's going to have to pay the taxes, whether it's you, your spouse, or, future beneficiaries. So just keep in mind that, and right now, I know the rules change constantly, but right now, if it's a non-spousal inheritance, it's typically a 10-year distribution window. Yeah. They have to take all of the money out as taxable income. By the way, most people, when they inherit this money from their parents, they're in their highest earning years, which is like the worst time to have extra taxable income. And then lastly, the last disadvantage of traditional is that, let's say that you're married your whole life. When you distribute money, let's say that you're a surviving widow or widower, right? You end up being a single filer, which again, as you know, is kind of like, it's not double taxation, but your filing status affects your marginal tax rate. So if you end up distributing while you're single, sometimes you can get hit with what we call the widow's penalty, which isn't a real term, but yeah.
And the only thing I want to re-hit on is just kind of the RMDs, because I don't think we went a lot of detail earlier in the podcast. And RMD is just really like required minimum distribution. And so in these pre-tax accounts, just so everybody knows, they're at a certain age. Now it's like for all of us, it's going to be 75. You are required to take money from this account. So you can't say like, I got plenty of Roth money, got plenty of taxable money, I'd much rather distribute from there. You are required to take distributions from these pre-tax accounts, and it's kind of based on your life expectancy, pretty much. And I think that's the most simple way to put it. And that can be a disadvantage, right? Because again, if you don't have a strategy, you have $10 million in pre-tax at 75, it might be like, wow, I'm withdrawing so much money from this account that I'm being pushed up into tax brackets and causing other taxation like you alluded to before.
Yeah. And to add to that, an easy way to think about this is, when you see a traditional 401k on a balance sheet, you think of it as an asset, but the IRS does not see it as an asset. They see it as taxable income that hasn't been received yet. It's really it's a bucket of future, and it's a bucket of future taxable income. That's what a traditional 401k is. So that's a good example, right? If you see $1 million traditional IRA and $1 million Roth IRA, they are worth very different amounts of money. The IRS just sees them as future income. So, so that's one of the advantages, by the way. I guess I'll go through this one a little faster with the with the Roth contributions. So advantages of Roth are kind of the opposite, is that, you get those tax-free earnings. So not only do you get you don't pay taxes twice on the money you put in, but you can distribute also the earnings tax-free if it's qualified distribution. One thing that people don't talk about with Roth is that there's you can withdraw direct contributions to a Roth at any age for any reason without tax or penalty. This is specifically to, Roth IRAs is typically what we're talking about here. If I contribute to a Roth IRA, I can take that money that I put into the Roth IRA back at any time, any age, any reason, no tax or penalty.
Even though we don't coach that.
Right. Exactly. I would never tell somebody to do that, but that's one of I guess it's an extra source of liquidity. But I would say that's a last resort, by the way.
Yeah, I always let people know that, because there's something for people to know that this is not locked up. I have the ability to use it. They love to know that. But I always say here, let me note this to you. The last place we want to take money from is there, because one, they have annual limits that are pretty small. You never get those back. And two, the assets we want to let to continue to compound are always going to be the tax-free ones. That's the most impactful place for the money to be.
Yeah. So I agree with you. So yes, liquidity, but that
but don't.
Again, that's a lot. But don't. That's the last resort. The other two big advantages of Roth are tax-free inheritance. Yes, they might still have the 10-year inheritance window, but it's still tax-free, right, to the beneficiary. And then lastly, no RMDs. This is huge, right? So you can by the way, you can contribute to Roth. Sorry, you can contribute to traditional pre-tax, early retirement, convert that to Roth. And then in the future, when you're in your 70s, you have no RMDs from those Roth IRAs. So you can avoid those RMDs even by making initially traditional contributions, converting. So it's really just spreading out the action of that contribution and distribution. And lastly, the disadvantages of Roth. Again, yes, there could be, you could have higher, taxable, you could have higher, you could have higher current taxable income. That's what we were talking about, is people within the 37% tax bracket. A disadvantage of Roth is that they're paying 37% on every dollar they're putting in. So not as much money is going in effectively. Also, their disadvantage is that they're reduced. I'm trying to remember what I put here. I guess I'll do the last three here. So disadvantages of Roth also include that direct Roth IRA contributions do have income thresholds. I know Thomas talks about with every client he works with about the backdoor and how to avoid pro rata taxation of, getting around that little kind of quote unquote legal loophole. But lastly, another disadvantage of retirement, the last disadvantage of Roth is that your retirement income might actually be too low. And this is kind of a funny thing. I've worked with clients who say, "Oh, I wish all my income in retirement were tax-free." I'm actually, you actually want forms of taxable income in retirement.
You want the deductions and you want to be able to use them.
Right. So for example, a married couple age 65 or older this year in 2023, $30,700 of their taxable income is completely federal tax-free. Right. It's we want to take advantage of that. That's free, effectively a free Roth conversion. Right. So we actually want sources of taxable income, not just in older traditional retirement, but also in early retirement. We actually want sources of taxable income. A good example of this is we actually want to meet at least the bottom of that, the federal poverty level, right? So that we can get full subsidies for health insurance through the marketplace. So if you don't have any sources of income in early retirement, you're actually not going to even be able to receive subsidies. You're going to be effectively choosing, Medicaid over. Again, not a lot of families I work with want to be on Medicaid when they're retired. They want one of those, they want a traditional plan with a, out-of-pocket maximum and the ability to continue contributing to HSAs possibly.
Yeah. And the other negative that we kind of alluded to in the last one that applies to this is that you lose the flexibility of optimizing. You grab the certainty and secure that tax bracket, but you lose the optionality of here's a sabbatical I'm taking, a low income year, another good time for Roth conversions. If you combine this client example I was just telling you about, if the market does drop like everybody's predicting, next year the market's down 30% and they have zero income, the amount that they would be able to convert over and instantly get reinvested is actually super impactful.
Yeah. And the IRS even specifically has said, once you convert money, you can't unwind it. You can't recharacterize or unwind it. So I love that you say that, because traditional provides ironically provides a lot more flexibility in retirement than Roth does, even though Roth does, have its highest and best use of tax-free long-term growth, which we all love. We'll take advantage of it. But keep in mind that the reason that you're investing and saving isn't just to have tax-free money. Like at the end of the day, you want that money to be used to like either spend, give, right? Like you have to keep it. I always say, give every dollar a job and a use by date, right? So every dollar that you contribute to an account, you have to say, when do I expect to use this money, right? And what do I expect to use this money for? And those two answers, to those two questions will actually like help it make it much easier to decide like which account do I contribute it to, and which type, whether traditional or Roth.
Totally. The last thing I want to hit on is, so when I go through this with high income people, they're like, okay, great. Like I totally get this now. Let's go traditional. And then I'm like, yep, let's do that. And then let's do a backdoor Roth. And they're like, what? You just said I don't want to do it. And like I just said Roth doesn't make sense for me. And I think that's why this makes a lot of sense to talk about here is when you are in the highest income earning years, and if you don't have way too much and you're not going to work till 75, et cetera, using all of your pre-tax option first makes a lot of sense, especially as a W-2 person, because there's only so much you can do. So, maybe it's dependent care FSA, maybe it's your HSA, maybe that's maxing your 401k, but pretty much at that point, you're out of them. There's no more use cases for you of here's ways to reduce my taxable income. So money's came to you, it's in your bank account, it's post-tax, right? So now you have the option of taxable, which great. There's a lot of flexibility in it. We love it. Capital gains, really great. But you would still choose tax-free over taxable, right? And so after those, we go to the backdoor Roth most often. And then what's left over, you go back to your taxable account. But this confuses people so much when you teach them all about traditional at highest income earning years, why you go Roth. But tax-free growth is really great. It just might be coming second to tax deferred because of the highest brackets they're in.
Yeah, that is spot on. I for every client I create what I call, retirement savings. It's called a contribution order of operations. So like, what is the order that we're going to contribute to accounts? And just like you said, it's always the HSAs, FSAs first, because that's not just, it doesn't just avoid like federal and state tax, but also avoids employment tax, which for high earners will just be saving like 1.45% because they're above that Social Security wage base. But so once they contribute to HSAs, FSAs, then it's maxing out all traditional pre-tax buckets. So traditional 401k. But, as you've noted, like, anybody can contribute with the earned income. You can contribute to a traditional IRA if you're a high earner, but you're probably not going to be able to deduct that contribution, which was kind of the whole point of choosing traditional.
At that point, do the back door because you already just did the same thing. Just convert it.
Right. So HSA, FSA, max out all the traditional options, the deductible traditional options, right? And then jump to Roth options, which for you the only two really remaining would be the backdoor Roth, which would be using IRA, a Roth IRA, and then the mega backdoor Roth, which may be in your 401k, depending on your plan, plan dependent. And then once you've done that, then your next order of operations, you've got one great account left that has no income thresholds, that has no limits, which is your taxable brokerage account. So that's the basic, like I would say 90% of the clients I work with who are still working, it's HSA, FSA, traditional, then Roth, then taxable brokerage. And then again, most people, especially if you're making $1 million a year, as long as you're not spending $1 million a year, you're gonna create so much future flexibility for yourself if you just make an intentional plan and order operations for yourself.
Yep, exactly. Okay, awesome, man. This was super great. Any last closing thoughts that you want to add in?
Yeah, I think that's it. Again, just keep in mind when somebody tells you, when you get really excited about the power of Roth, say, yes, Roth is great, but maybe I can get Roth later, not today. So yeah, just good point. By choosing traditional, you're not saying no to Roth. You're just saying no to Roth right now. So just, again, take 1 year at a time and make those decisions intentionally as they come.
And I'll say for me, like I'll be honest at what I do. So I'm 27, right? Yeah, I turned 28 this month, right? Mm-hmm. And I am in a high income earning bracket right now. I'm single. I'm getting married. Mm-hmm. That might bring me down to a little bit lower of a bracket. Like maybe I'll be in 32 next year. It's going to be close, right?
Get married by December 31st. Thomas.
Yeah, we probably are. I'm honestly like, we get married early next year. So we're considering doing it because I did the math and I'll save $18,000 in tax because of where ours is.
That's why we
like,
get married, right, Thomas?
I'm like, well, if we're already going to do it, why wouldn't we just do it a little bit early and save that much on taxes? But either way, I'm still like, I'm going to do Roth right now just because of the fact that I know I like my income's going 1.5 to almost double per year, that I'm going to be in traditional for so long that I'm like, well, hey, if for 2 years plus all the Roth IRA, if I can get to like 100K by 30 in Roth and then everything traditional for a long time,
that grow.
That
just
will
let it go.
Yeah, that'll be really impactful for me, but I'm knowing that I'm not going to go all Roth for a long time. I just have a short period of time, and I might be in 24, I might touch 32, and that's okay because I'm going to be in the highest brackets for a really long period of time. And I have no problem admitting that. But that's where, like, you know, if you finally hit high brackets in your 40s, you know, maybe you'd go traditional earlier than me. It really depends on your situation.
Yeah. And last thing to add there is that, especially just with the entrepreneurs, like I work with a lot of people who, you know, they own businesses, they're making like great money. They talk about like this idea of retiring someday, but in reality, a lot of entrepreneurs, retiring just means like selling this business or like kind of getting, going away from a business to create something new. So if you're that type of person who just finds yourself just constantly creating, like, you and I, Thomas, are this way, like you're always going to be an entrepreneur. So you might as well, like, you're almost hedging. You're almost like contributing to Roth to hedge the possibility that you might be an entrepreneur for the rest of your life.
Yeah, exactly. I don't see myself ever really not working. Like I like having something to work on and build towards. If anything, I see myself more of like when I have young kids, like slowing growth to have more time there and then work even more later on than like that's why I'm grinding so much now, building the business so fast, having as many clients as we can is so that's more so the optionality that I would want to say, we're only going to take on 5 clients this year or 10 clients instead of the 40 or whatever we're doing right now. Like, you know, that's how I want to plan.
And Thomas, I'm literally just maybe like a few years ahead of you, not in terms of like knowledge or expertise or anything, but in terms of just like seasons, right? Like, you're about to get married and you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to grind now so that I don't have to grind later, or I have optionality in how much I grind, right? Whereas I'm the opposite. I've actually run down where in terms of my calendar, I'm limiting myself to no more than 2 hours of meetings per day. Start the day.
Great.
I have a 6-hour work day, and I'm also I'm creating my business going into 2024 where I actually don't have to work more than 5 to 10 hours a week to sustain all my businesses, right? So, again, like I did the grinding so that now, like my wife and I are actually in the process of adoption, right?
Awesome, dude. Congrats.
Yeah, super excited. But guess what? When that baby comes through the door, like I want the optionality to say, hey, like I'm not going to accept, like I will not accept meetings for like a whole 3 months in my calendar, but it won't affect my revenue because I did the grinding up front to make sure that I had a plan. So just another reason, by the way, if you're an entrepreneur, yes, like you have a lot of concentration in your business, but also consider, how do you diversify your income sources even within that one business? Or like I kind of have, I have one brand, but 3 businesses. Like I love that I can kind of say, hey, like I'm going to turn that business down a little bit and I'm going to turn this one up. Like just switching between businesses and diversifying, like you've done with your awesome course, Thomas, with Trayton and Rachel. Like that's awesome. Like just think of ways you can diversify. It's not just about making more money, but diversification also provides more optionality and control of your calendar when you do have those big life events like getting married, going on a honeymoon, having kids, adopting, right? So just give yourself options. Like your future self will thank you for grinding it out today, Thomas, for sure.
Totally. Well, Cody, man, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. For the few people here, I guess, that don't know you or where to follow you, where are the best places to kind of engage with what you're doing?
Yeah. So, Twitter, Measure Twice MNY. If you're a financial advisor, go to measuretwiceplanners.com. If you're not an advisor, go to measuretwicemoney.com. And I'm actually not taking on any future clients for financial planning, any new clients. So I won't even mention that my firm name because it's kind of useless at this point.
I wonder what your firm name is. Hard to figure out.
It's Measure Twice something. Yeah, exactly.
But all right, man. Well, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate the time. And everybody, thank you for listening. Just quick shout out. So I launched a YouTube channel about a week ago. We're a little over 100 subscribers. It's just at T Kopelman. So head on over and we have a bunch of good content coming out for you. But we'll see you guys back next week.
Cool.